But I want to be very effective with everyone's time here today. And I also want to try to bring people up to date so they understand what we're talking about. First of all, my name is Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight, and this is regarding a lawsuit with the San Diego County Registrar of Voters. And basically we want clean and complete and not these sort of sham audits that they've been conducting so far. They've been leaving out so many ballots from the audits, they're pretty much worthless at this point. And that's why we filed this lawsuit. And it was filed back in June 16th after the primary. We filed the original case, trying to get also for them to stop certification, and we weren't able to do that. We did have a full hearing on July 6th, just before they certified the California election. But it wasn't, the judge took it under submission and didn't actually rule on it until later, August 3rd. So it was nearly a month later before we got the ruling. And then another month later, or couple of months later, we had a full trial. So in the first ruling, he said we probably would prevail, but we had to have the full trial, which lasted 4 days. And then on the 26th of October, we had the statement of intended decision that came out. And that's the reason for this press conference today, is to tell you what happened at this 4-day trial and tell you what the judge decided. Essentially, the decision says that all vote-by-mail ballots must be included in the 1% manual tally. They were excluding, so yeah, this is a big step. And I want to thank, before we go on, all the people behind us who worked long hours trying to figure out what was going on in the Registrar of Voters here and providing oversight. So we won that little bit there. At least it looks like we will win it when this whole thing is done. They were leaving out about all the latter half, a little bit less than half of the vote-by-mail ballots. About 30% of the ballots in the election were being left out, and those were the vote-by-mail ballots. The other problem is the provisional ballots. If you go to the polling place, it's the wrong one, or you don't have your vote-by-mail ballot to surrender, you have to sign up as a provisional voter. Those are not being tallied either in the audit. So those are about 10%. So between both of those, it was about 40% of the ballots that were not included. And now we're getting the additional 30%, but we don't see there's any reason why that the provisional ballot should be left out. They're a ballot, they should be treated like any other ballot, and these are like second-class voters here if you don't get full protection of the 1% manual tally audit. Also, the decision said that they wouldn't necessarily stop certification of this election if it's not done right. And so those are things, though, that are still going to be discussed, because we have until December 1st, which is and that could be changed possibly. But there's going to be another hearing where we can go over and discuss some of these other issues, challenge some of the things in his ruling, which I think some of are very easy to challenge. So our position is that we still believe the manual tally audit must include all ballots in the selection process. All ballots that are voted should be subject to possible selection in the random choice that they do. If you leave any group out, especially if you can identify them as a group, then a hacker can say, hey, well, let's just fix that group, we'll never be caught. And indeed, if you leave out 40% of the ballots, it's easy to fix the election, similar to what we just saw in this last primary, where the polling place ballots came in with Bernie Sanders getting 58% to Hillary's 42%, but the early vote-by-mail ballots that were always poorly audited, and I'll tell you, the selection process was very suspicious, those were the other way around. Hillary Clinton won 58 to Bernie Sanders 42. Provisional ballots, once they're validated, should be considered the same as any other ballot. They should not have the special level of confusion where they're not subject to that. The statement of intended decision, we believe, has flaws that we're going to be discussing, and we want San Diego to follow the law. Now, they said we wanted 100% of the ballot, more than 100% of the ballots to be included. They're saying that we said that? No, I'm sorry, we never said that. That's a stupid thing to even say. And so hopefully we'll be able to get that out of the ruling because that was not in there. These shortcuts that this election official is taking and the other officials around the country, around the state, and we're not going to get into the rest of the country because it's such a mess. But in California, these shortcuts taken by the election officials, I believe, should be considered election fraud. Just think, if a voter votes twice, that's voter fraud. You can go to prison for 5 years for doing that. But if they leave out 285,000 ballots from the audit, no penalty. No penalty. They just, in fact, they haven't even slapped them on the wrist yet.
Wrong.
Now, at this point, I'd like to introduce the attorney that's been handling this, Alan Gerasi from the CARE Legal Group, to explain his point of view on the outlook, what this decision means, and what we're going to be doing in the future. Alan, welcome.
Well, good morning all. My name is Alan Gerasi, CARE Law Group. And I first want to say thank you to my client, Ray Lutz, because he's the one that discovered this issue, brought it to the forefront of the public interest, took the initiative and filed a lawsuit, and then was smart to hire an attorney. But without Ray Lutz actually discovering and enforcing this law, we wouldn't be here today. So Ray, I just want to say thank you. So where are we today is the question. Well, the judge has issued a statement of decision, intended statement of decision, which is a part of the process of coming to a judgment. Everybody in the legal world knows what a judgment is. That's the final outcome of a trial. And that's where we're headed. We're headed towards a judgment. And because we had a non-jury trial in this case, a judge who was acting both as the trier of fact and the trier of law in the case, he's taken the initiative of writing his very own statement of decision. Now, a lot of judges don't do that. A lot of the judges ask the attorneys to write the statement of decision, and he just signs off on it. So the judge realizes the public interest involved in this case and has taken the time to write a rather long statement of decision, which included a lot of his observations and notes about various witnesses that testified. And he did that clearly because he knows that this case is likely headed towards an appeal by one side or the other or both. So he wanted to make sure there was a very certain record that will be taken to the Court of Appeals, so the Court of Appeals will have the benefit of all of his observations during the trial, both on issues of substance and on issues of credibility. And he made comment of both in his lengthy intended statement of decision. So there's a very short time within which we are required to file objections or comments about his statement of decision, and I plan on doing that this week for our case, and I'm sure the county will do so for their case. And then the judge will have the opportunity to basically file the final statement of decision, which becomes part of the judgment in the case. So he set a status conference for December 1st, 2016. However, I'd like to push that up a little bit and go in ex parte maybe shortly before Thanksgiving and get this issue moving so that at very least after the general election and during the official canvass, we can convince the judge that a final judgment is necessary for purposes of enforcement. And why is that important? Well, a judgment can be enforced. A judgment of this sort is enforced using contempt proceedings. If the Registrar of Voters, after a judgment is filed, decides to not follow the statement of decision and the judgment of the court, then a contempt proceeding can be started against the Registrar of Voters to compel him to do so. So that might be where we're headed. Another alternative is that the Registrar of Voters might voluntarily comply with the judgment, modify their policies and procedures so that they can include 100% of the ballots in the 1% audit as we believe is required, and he'll be in compliance with the judgment. Meanwhile, the county could file an appeal of the decision, and the Court of Appeals here in San Diego is the 4th District Court of Appeals. We could file a cross appeal on the issue of the provisional ballots, as Mr. Lutz pointed out, and the appellate court will have the opportunity to hear the case, what we say de novo, which means brand new, and review the entire record. And when it goes to the appellate court, 3 justices of the appellate court are appointed, and they review the entire record. They hear the written and oral arguments of the attorneys, and then they usually issue a written decision. They can decide whether or not the written decision is published or not published. If it is published, it becomes the law of the state of California in all the courts, because there are no other decisions in California concerning this section of the Elections Code. So it will become the law of the state of California if the appellate court sees fit to publish the opinion, which we believe it will due to the public interest in this case. So that's the overview of where we are, where we're headed, and where we're going. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Now, I'd like to cover a few things, additional things that we did learn in this lawsuit. I do think that the workers at the Registrar of Voters do a good job.
Yes.
Within their work, description, their job description, what they're told to do. I think they do a good job. However, what they're told to do is sometimes very wrong, and so this is at the top level. So it's not the workers that we're talking about. I think the workers are all just actually, I'm really impressed with how well they're doing this election. The problem is they're still violating the law at the highest level of not doing, at least not without this lawsuit, they would not be including all these ballots in their audit process. Now in this last election, we had a large number of NPP crossover ballots that were cast. These were voters who typically were nonpartisan voters, and they wanted to vote for one of the presidential candidates, whether that be, it had to be in the Democratic Party or one of the other parties. It could not be the Republican Party. But they would then select what type of ballot they wanted. And the proper way to handle these ballots would be to put the ballots into the ballot box directly once those people had signed and received the right ballot. And we heard that some of these ballots were being put into provisional envelopes and handled as provisionals instead. What we found was that largely they were handled correctly and put into the ballot box. But some were improperly handled and put into provisionals, and those were then not audited, unfortunately, and those were held out to the very bitter end as well. So that we did discover how they handled that. And amazingly, we asked them the question over and over. We could not get an answer about how they were handling those, even though we did try. We finally, in the middle of this long end of the trial, we finally got them to answer the question. The batch mode is what they started to use here. Now they have 2 options for doing the manual tally. One is to take all of the precincts, precinct by precinct, and choose 1% of them. When those are done, then tally up, in this case, 16 precincts out of 1,522. The other approach is you do that for the stuff that comes in first, and then for the vote by mail ballots, you do them in batches. So as they come in, you can select from the batches that you have, and those batches are not necessarily sorted by precinct. This was introduced in the year 2011 with a bill that went through to make it easier for them to process all those vote by mail ballots. Actually, that whole bill has no meaning at all unless they're planning to do more vote by mail ballots and provisionals than they had on election night. Otherwise, you don't have any need for it. So the whole reason for that bill was because the legislature did intend for them to be auditing all of the ballots cast, as the law says. So they were using this batch mode, but they have no written procedure for it. And then partway through the election process, the manual tally process, about halfway through, they decided to switch gears and instead go back to the precinct mode that they had in their document. That meant that they had to go into 1,300 batches and pull out from those the 16 precincts that were going to be audited. It took 40 people a whole week of work to get those out. No wonder they say that they can't do it in time. If they're making decisions like that, they should have just proceeded with the batch mode. No, we never complained about it. Except for the fact that we didn't have a report. We want a report of all the batches so there can't be any funny business. Now, this process is suspect that they used because we found out at the end of the election that those early vote by mail ballots, the ones that had this cheesy auditing process, had Hillary Clinton winning by a landslide, whereas the polling place ballots, Bernie Sanders won. So it was suspect that they were using this bad procedure, undocumented, then went back in, redid it, had to pull them out by hand according to a computer report that was kind of like circular reasoning. You go in, you pull the ballots out according to a computer report that says where they are, then you compare with the computer report again. Not a good process. Now, other counties in the state are also refusing to do the correct type of audits, but some do. Alameda County, which is a large county, contains Oakland, has said that they're going to be including all of the ballots, all the polls, vote by mail, and provisionals in their manual tally process. Some counties are even worse. Fresno is choosing the random selection of precincts 2 months ago. Already chosen. Guess what? If you're a hacker, you already know which ones to avoid. And if you look at the video from Black Box Voting called, it's a new one that just came out, which is called Fractionalized Voting. It shows you how they can use fractions, not integers, but fractions in order to change the result of the election. Within just a few seconds, an operator of the GEM software can change the election according to predefined percentages and avoid all of those precincts that they know are not going to be in the audit. It's really startling. We also found, and this was known, but we had Professor Stark from Berkeley there, an eminent statistician, verify my complaint from years ago that this registrar has a flawed random selection process. They choose ping pong balls out of little containers, but they do it wrong, and so the percentages are not even. He confirmed that, but you know what? They are refusing to make any changes here, even though we tell them they're doing it wrong. Finally, the whiteout tape and modification of the ballots with no procedures, no logging of what goes on, nor any reporting. One person does it. They sit there with some whiteout tape and decide what votes they want to white out and which ones they want to enhance. No one watches them. Then they merge those into the rest of the ballots and never to be seen again. The registrar says we're not using whiteout. We're using whiteout tape. So you can look underneath the tape. But guess what? No one does that. No one looks under the tape. He says we're using pens that are blue so that we can still see the vote underneath. That's great, Michael Vu, but no one is looking at them to see what is happening. You don't have a procedure that's written. You don't have any reporting at all on what you're doing. And we can't audit that. We can't figure out what you're doing there. It's a mess. So I do want us to, again, say and give a round of applause to all the volunteers who came out here today and have been helping with this whole process. Without their help, we wouldn't be here. And citizens, I'm speaking to you if you're watching this on the video. It's your chance to help our democracy. We need you to go to citizensoversight.org/sign up and sign up for this election. We need people to help us. We've identified the top 175 counties in the nation. That's 50% of the voters. So if we are being very tactical about this by choosing a minimum number of counties and still having a large impact. Out of those 8,000 districts, we're choosing only 175, and we get 50% of all the voters in the nation. We need people to volunteer to provide oversight at the registrars of voters that we have here. We're just standing right outside the registrar of voters building. We're not able to get too close today because they are actively voting. We need people to go in and volunteer to be observers. Number one, you go in and you observe what's there. Just having a pair of, actually they did an experiment, psychological experiment at the coffee niche where they had the honor system of people putting money in the box. They put a pair of photocopied eyes on the wall. That was all. Just a pair of eyes looking at them. And the fees for coffee went up by 3 times. So it is, when you go in, you may not see anything. It's like the police car effect on the freeway. Police probably think everybody drives the speed limit because around them, everybody is. You get far enough away from that police car and people are going much higher than the speed limit, let me tell you. But from the police officer's point of view, they think everything is fine. Well, when you go in, you're going to be like a police officer. The registrar of voters that you're going to be observing, they're going to be just doing everything perfectly. But you're not going to maybe see any fraud or anything else, but let me tell you, it's important that you're there. You're like those photocopied eyes next to the coffee nook. Second way to do this is by doing analysis of the data files, and this is really where Citizens Oversight has been leading the way, I think, because we were looking at the data files and we have a procedure called the snapshot protocol where you get data files at a certain time so that you can make sure that the audit is coming out with results that are reasonable. Here's the thing. They choose only part of the ballots for the audit. And weren't giving us the report that corresponded to those ballots, the ones that they were using. Only the report at the end. So I could not compare report to what they were doing in the manual tally. It didn't make any sense. So I had to get a report that would match. And that's the snapshot file that we're looking for. We want it for all the precincts, all the batches that they're going to be tallying ahead of time, before they do the manual selection, the random selection for what they're going to choose. So we want the snapshot file has all of the precincts, all of the batches outlined according to every race and every candidate and what their vote totals were. And we want that from the registrar of voters and in our hands or on their website disclosed somehow so that they can't change it. Because if they then do a random selection of precincts that they're going to be auditing and you don't have the file, first of all, you can't compare anything about what they're doing. You may as well just have a theater of people marking sheets. You can't verify that they're coming up with the right results. But secondly, they could change it. If they could say, well, we're going to change the computer back there so that it will correspond with what those ballots are if they happen to fix one of those precincts. And if you have that file, then that eliminates that option for them to do that type of hacking. The data file method of providing oversight is really important because most of the work being done here is inside computers. And we need to be able to get to those data files to be able to check what the computers are doing. And we're not going to be able to get to the point where they're counting, I believe, all paper ballots in big counties like this. However, there's a new movement which is very important I want to mention before closing. That is imaging all of the ballots using high resolution digital imaging, not super high, but you just get the entire ballot as an image. And we're used to this. JPEG images are all over the internet. You just have every single ballot is imaged, and that's the first step. You image all the ballots, you don't try to count them. And then everybody who wants to can come in and look at all the ballots easily. Run your own software across them, proprietary or not, open source or not, doesn't matter. You can still look at all of those ballots. Now come down here, there's a California shredding truck making this is what we saw before. California shredding was here earlier, apparently picking up ballots during the primary. Now back here again. They're back here again at to possibly picking up some ballots in there. You know, really, registrar voters, don't bring the shredding truck around the registrar when in the middle of voting. We don't want to see it because then we have to investigate whether you're shredding things. Oh my word. Okay, again, I want to thank everybody that's watching. Please go to Citizens Oversight /sign up and sign up to be a volunteer. citizensoversight.org/donate. Please donate there because we do have expenses. As we go forward, we're going to be trying to address this issue in other counties and in other states across the nation. By the way, I'm going to Florida from the 11th through the 22nd because that is a battleground state in this election, and I want to make sure that they're going to be doing things cleanly down there, and they weren't in the last primary. And so I will be touring around there a little bit to see if I can get especially Miami-Dade to make sure that they're doing their random selection process correctly. Now in Florida, they only choose one random race. Not all the races that they require here, just one, and only 1% of the precincts are that one random race. So it's about as minimal as you could possibly do and still claim that you're doing some kind of an audit. Worse, if there's any kind of a recount that happens, then they don't do the audit at all. They just check over the ballots for over and under votes and no audit whatsoever. Okay, now, so that's going to be happening. I thank you very much, and I again ask you to step forward and help us with our oversight project. Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight. Again, thank you all the volunteers. Okay, is there any questions? Okay, Daniel, what's the question?
I have one question. So let's say I'm like my roommate who's not a citizen yet. Can they help with the project in any way? He speaks first. He sometimes has trouble with the language, but he can understand things with help.
Yeah.
He has a lot of
Okay,
help.
so the question is, can someone who's a non-citizen help oversee the election? Absolutely. If you're a member of the public, you can help. A member of the public means absolutely anybody, and you can help out with this. It doesn't matter if you are a citizen or not, can speak the language or not, or anything. Just as I said, if you're in there with your set of eyes looking over somebody's shoulder, that changes everything what they're doing. And if you're not there, then all hell breaks loose. All right, any other questions? Frank, do you have any questions this time? None. Okay, was there anything on the chat room?
Just a lot of thank yous. There are no questions, but thank
No
you.
questions.
Good job.
Okay, well, thank you for attending in the live feed. If you can hear things in the live feed, please check for the YouTube version, and that'll be posted in a few days. Okay, thanks again. Well, it's not over yet.